We're just waiting for other people to join, and we're going to start at 6:05. Oh, there you go. It's 6:05. So I'm going to start. I'd like to welcome everyone tonight to CIBSE's webinar event for CIBSE Victoria. Tonight, we've got Hashan Samarawikrama from VBIS, who's presenting Structuring Your Asset Information to Achieve Built Outcomes. Tonight, we'll be recording this session, so if you want to go back through the CIBSE website, you can go back and re-review this presentation. Just for everyone's knowledge, the whole session's being recorded, including the Q&A. So yeah, that's all available to you if you go on the CIBSE website after the event. I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we stand today, the Djadja Wurrung people, and also acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. We pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging. I'd just also like to draw your attention to the latest online engineering buildings at cibse.org.au. So once again, if you want to take a shot of that, feel free, and then just follow yourself to that website, and you'll find the latest engineering buildings at cibse.org.au. Talking of buildings, there's a whole section on podcasts. The latest podcast is Building to Bounce Back, and once again, that's on the website cibse.org.au. It's freely available if you're a member, obviously, but yeah, it's there available now for listening to. Further, I'd just like to go in and talk about the CIBSE offering. There's a membership offering of 17 months of membership for the price of 12. So if you become a CIBSE affiliate or graduate this month, we'll be giving a 17-month membership subscription, which runs through until the 31st of December 2021. Your membership will include all of the following benefits, which is a subscription to CIBSE Journal, the unlimited downloads of all building services knowledge guides, as well as the ANZ regional quarterly digital publications. Engineering Buildings Journal. An opportunity to gain professional recognition for the designatory letters and routes to professional registration, CEng, IEng and Eng Tech. It invites to hundreds of CPD and networking opportunities organised by and for building services engineering professionals. You'll also save 15% off CIBSE online learning modules and virtual learning courses. Membership to CIBSE's 5 societies and 19 special interest groups. You can apply for affiliate membership online at cibse.org/affiliate. Further, I'd like to draw your attention to the upcoming program, which there's an expert of both sides of Tasman to share exemplar case studies of regenerative and net zero building practices, as well as new information on future policy changes that bring owners and services engineers needs and understandings to minimise future risks to assets, both existing and new. This is a vision for 2030 reality. The price is $99 for members, and whilst it's 31st of July, I'm sure you can still register after that period. And finally, ARBS, to the best of our knowledge, is still proceeding in 2021. So I'd like to draw your attention to that. Connect with ARBS, look at registration. It is scheduled for, my understanding is for 15th to 17th of February 2021 at the Melbourne Convention and Exhibition Centre. Now, back to structuring your asset information to achieve built outcomes. I'd like to draw and welcome Hisham Samarawar to tonight's presentation. Over to you, Hisham.
Thank you, James, and thank you for attending my last name as well. That's always appreciated.
Thanks.
All right, thanks for that introduction. So I wanted to take the opportunity to give everyone a bit of an overview of a new development that's happened, which is VBIS. So VBIS firstly stands for Virtual Buildings Information System, and the overall objective is to try and get the right information to the right people at the right time. So it's facilitating an asset-centric structuring to information so that the right information is available, and also making it easy to access the right information by the right people. So to kick things off, I'll give you a bit of context of why we've gone down this journey and why the development took place. And it really focuses on the role of information in asset management activities in that operations phase of the built environment. And in this sort of space, we've seen a few different market trends over the last number of years. One of them being there's a lot of technology development that's happened, which has meant it's now getting a lot easier to get information from the field. So there's a lot of technology sensor type development that's happening. And there's a lot of digital engineering that's happening in the construction phase, which is then getting transferred into operations as well. And on top of this, there's a lot of cost-efficient ways of storing information. So what all this means is there's now volumes and volumes of information that's being gathered, and it now becomes very important that a simple, practical, and expandable classification schema or structure is adopted to make sure that the information is structured in a simple way that can actually be utilized. Otherwise, you run the risk of just storing gigabytes or terabytes of information, and it doesn't actually serve any useful purpose. Now, the other aspect we've seen in sort of space is a lot of bolt-on technology, as we call it. So these are a bit of buzzwords in the industry like advanced analytics, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. All of these bolt-on tech really relies on a sound and high quality baseline of asset information to actually perform and draw the full benefits from the technology. Otherwise, it tends to be a bit rubbish in, rubbish out with them. So again, that's another factor what drives us to make sure that that consistent information structure is established, and it's also asset centric, because in terms of asset management, that's the critical identifier for all of this. I'll go into one example of what I mean by that. So if I just touch on predictive maintenance and lifecycle analysis, the graph you see here might be familiar to some, is the typical life curve of an asset. You can see at the start it's nearly been installed, so it's in that warranty phase and the resistance to failure is quite high, but as the asset is getting used, that obviously changes and the maintenance requirements change. And then you see in the red the functional failure point, which is the point of the asset where it becomes a lot less reliable. So that's really where you should be aiming to replace that asset. So the challenge here is to figure out exactly where that point is in a timescale perspective, so that you're trying to get the right balance between maximizing the usage of the asset, but also planning the replacement without affecting the uptime or the impact of performance in the built environment. So in that sort of scenario, what we look to is what sort of information is being gathered to actually assist with that decision to be made. And what we find is there's already a lot of information being gathered, but they happen to be gathered in different applications that's in use in that built environment. So what we're seeing here is the increase in the frequency of the failures that's normally logged in a help desk system or a service management system. So you can start to see there the service call rate starting to spike in line with the frequency of the failures. And then you also have other aspects like the costs of the reactive fixing that has gone on, which typically gets logged in a financial system or asset management system. So what this leads to is the information's already there, it's in different places, and it brings to the attention the need for a consistent asset reference system so that all that information can be consistently tagged so that it can be correlated together to actually drive that full insight or that full whole of life view of the asset's performance to actually drive those asset management and facility management decisions that need to be made. So hopefully that gives a bit of perspective of why we've gone down this journey. And now I just wanted to cover the how. So a bit of background on the project itself. It's a consortium effort. AG Coombs is the lead partner. There's a couple of other partners in the group as well. So Bella Jack is a liaison and the overall project manager. So liaison with the government. And Wise Working is a technology partner that came on board to help us test the VBIS standard as it gets developed across various commercial applications. And this is all facilitated by funding from the Victorian government. And once the project period has completed, the arrangement is to go into a not-for-profit arrangement so that the open standard can be reliably made available for a long period of time. Now, with all of this that was happening, the various governments in Australia also started to see all the large capital infrastructure projects that are planned and being delivered over the next few years. And if memory serves me right, there's about $100 billion of work just happening or being planned in the next 12 to 24 months alone. So with that sort of development and scale that's happening, and the fact that there's going to be a lot of digital processes and digital outputs that are being delivered through this. And it's a case of, it's a 5-10 year build period that then has a 50+ year operational period. They're very mindful of having some sort of framework defined on how the digital information can be progressed across to that operations phase. So in that, Victoria released the Victoria Digital Asset Strategy. And VBIS is included in that, in the framework of asset classification and system interoperability. And that was in March 2020. And more recently, as only a couple of weeks ago, Queensland government also released their data and information guideline. And again, VBIS is a part of that. So you can see there's significant backing from a financial perspective and as well as a technical perspective from various governments in Australia to then give that acceptance of the importance of asset classification and how to best structure that information. So I hope that gives you a bit of perspective of and a bit of background of how we've gone about this. And following on from that, I just want to cover the objectives of the project. So first is it's an open standard, and it's definitely not software in itself. So just need to call that out because some people think that it is another software platform that sits alongside the multitude of software platforms that's already in use. So that's not the case. And that's done intentionally because we want to make sure this is a standard that is adopted and can be used by commercial applications that are already in use to maintain the built environment. So we're very mindful that people have already invested not just the money to put in the software systems, but also the change management, the training aspects as well. And people are generally comfortable with using the applications that they're already using. So instead, what we want to do is superpower that existing application to then drive or promote consistency in the information structure to then help with those asset management activities. And to also facilitate the ease of information handover. So one thing is construction to operations, for example. That can be a cumbersome process and the information may not turn up in the format that's always desired by the operations people. So there's a lot of benefit in having an asset-centric nature and then keeping in mind that the existing applications in the operations phase can be used for that information and then linked back to each other, which is what VBIS facilitates. And the other aspect is BIM and FM. So a lot of people are aware of BIM being significantly used in the construction phase of projects because there's a lot of benefits there in terms of clash detection and the like. But that then it gets handed over to the operations phase and it rarely gets used after that. So what we want to do here is make sure that the useful information in the BIM model is continued to be used in that operations phase. And what we see is the roadblock generally tends to be somewhat of a perspective by the people in the operations phase that it's difficult to navigate and difficult to access. And so what we want to do is make it easy for people to access the information in the BIM model from the applications they're already comfortable using, like asset management systems and the like. And that's, again, what is facilitated through the VBIS standard. And all of this then rolls up to making activities more efficient using the existing information that's already available. So with those objectives in mind, I just want to cover what is VBIS. So VBIS consists of two main parts. First one is a asset classification structure, and the second part is a search syntax. So the first one is really, let's make sure we're classifying everything consistently and allocating tags to the data components of specific assets so we know what's what. And part two really is about that common language that can be spoken between different applications so that people can easily access the data that sits in different places. But I'll elaborate on that in the following slides. So going into a bit more detail of that first part, which is the classification structure and the VBIS tag. The classification structure that's been developed is a 4-level structure. The first level is the discipline that the asset typically sits in. And level 2 to 4 goes into the detail of classifying the asset type down to the level of detail needed in that operations phase for asset management activities like lifecycle planning, maintenance activity planning, and performance benchmarking. So you can see a couple of examples there on the top. You can see how the 4-level structure gets structured for, in this case, the cladding, which happens to be the type that was combustible, I think it was last year or so, and ran into a few issues. And the second one there is a centrifugal axial split long coupled pump. And you can see how the 4-level structure then rolls up to the VBIS tag, which is in the middle of the screen for each of those asset types. Now the VBIS tag is alphabetic. It's representative of that 4-level structure. And we've also introduced reserve words in there to pick up industry common acronyms. So as an example, if I think of a pan-tilt zoom camera, that's widely known in the security industry as a PTZ camera. So we've made sure to introduce the acronym that's commonly known in there. And that's done intentionally so that the tag itself is human readable as possible. The intention obviously is to be a classifier and then a meta tag that sits in the background of systems, but we are mindful that if it is made visible, then over a period of time, people will get familiar and be able to identify the exact asset type just by looking at the VBIS tag. Now the other aspect is wildcard searching. And if I point you to the bottom of the slide there, you can see a couple of examples of pumps. Now, these happen to be the same type of pump, but used in different systems for different applications. So a chilled water pump and a water pump. The chilled water pump sits in the mechanical system. So you can see that with the ME for the VBIS tag. And the water pump sits in the hydraulic system, which you can see by the HY in the VBIS tag. But what you'll notice is level 2 to 4 is consistent because they are, like I said before, the same type of pump, so centrifugal long coupled in this case. So what this means is you can do a wildcard search and figure out what are all my pumps of this type across any discipline in my portfolio, or you can do it by system, or you can search for all assets in each system, depending on which portion of the tag that you do a wildcard search on. And I just wanted to show you a screenshot of how the VBIS tags or the VBIS table is presented. So this is a screenshot of the chiller section in the mechanical discipline. So first level is obviously mechanical, and you can see to the left in the blue columns, the level 2 to 4 structure, which details out all the different types of chillers that are typically in use. And that then leads into the green column in the middle, which is the unique VBIS tag allocated to each asset type. Now you can see there that's quite a consistent structure. It's unique to each asset type. So all the details like wildcard searching and identification and things like that can be incorporated. Now, the other aspect I'll draw to you towards is there's 2 levels, 3 levels, and 4 levels, depending on the granularity that you want to go to. And this might be the case at different phases of the life cycle of the development or the construction, where in the design phase, you might not know what specific type of chiller is going to the full 4 levels, but you do know that a chiller is going to go there. So what that lets you do is do a 2-level tag at that initial concept phase, but then it still lets you know exactly what further detail is available so that that structure can continue to evolve into that 4-level structure as the design evolves. Now, with this, another aspect we've done is to look globally for what other asset classification schemas are widely in use in the world. And 2 of them that we came across were Uniclass 2015 and Omniclass 2012. And what we've also done is to make sure we have mapped the product codes of each of those against the VBIS structure as well. Because we are mindful there might be, Uniclass codes already in use by some, and what that means is, you can use this alongside any existing classification schema. So VBIS is all about working alongside any classification or naming convention that might already be in use, and that can happen side by side, basically. And the other aspect I'll draw you to is the Uniclass schema and the Omniclass schema. They focus on the construction phase of operations, of buildings. So you can see there's a few gaps there because lifecycle planning and maintenance activity planning doesn't really feature in that construction phase. So as a result, for certain asset types, they don't really need to go down to the level of detail that is actually still needed in that operations phase. But again, VBIS can work alongside any convention that's in use so that that transition activity can happen seamlessly. And the other aspect I wanted to cover is VBIS tackles all the different asset types that make up the built environment. So we've identified 33 different disciplines to date. We've released 21 of them, and we followed a 80-20 principle and covered the most common asset disciplines that's already in use already. That's covered in that 21. And the remainder will be releasing on a monthly basis. So there's, I think, 2 or 3 coming out this month, and then in the following months as well. Now, this is not to say we'll stop at 33 or these are the only 33. We are very mindful that there are other disciplines that we haven't catered for here, and we are more than willing and very open to work with people to get those disciplines developed as required. And that's a case of perhaps working with certain subject matter experts in that sort of area, depending on what the need is. So with that sort of example, hopefully that gives you a bit of a sense for how the VBIS tags and the classification structure is being developed. Now, I just want to go through a bit of a scenario of how the VBIS tag could be applied in a scenario. So the scenario here is an existing building. It's a couple of decades old, so there's been a few assets being added and disposed of through different refurbs over the years. So as you can see in this case, they haven't really kept a consistent naming convention. So the naming is a bit all over the place, as you can see. Now, this building is also going through a new retrofit. So there's a few new assets coming in. What we see as a naming convention tends to be quite consistent amongst them, but they don't really relate back to the convention used in the existing building. So in this sort of example, we allocate the VBIS tags across it, which is just an additional field basically in this case. And what I want to point out is for new development, we've also incorporated the VBIS tags into the BIM model templates hosted by BIM Oz. So that means when designers are picking up the certified templates from BIM Oz, the tag is already in there. So hopefully that reduces a couple of steps in having to put the tags into any new development, and that can flow through accordingly. But what you can see now is when the tag is added, that gives you that consistency in that digital structure straight away, because you're not dropping off any assets. They can be allocated within the discipline or the category of that asset. So in this case, you can see how the pumps are starting to get structured together, any security aspects together, and any air handlers together in this example. As an expansion to that, what you can also start to do now is help with digital procurement and digital contract and management activities, because the VBIS tag also has that discipline as the first level. So in procurement and contract management, what's critical is the scope of work. And in this case, the scope of work is your asset register or your asset list, and how accurate that is, so that we're not dropping off any assets, so that when the scope of work is formed, there's no gaps in there. So with that wildcard searching and the VBIS tag, this quickly gets you the ability to search and make sure that sort of packaging can happen relatively painlessly. And the other side of this is the 4-level structure tells you exactly what type of asset each of them are. And that's important when you're considering life cycle planning, because you got to know what the asset is, because those life curves, for example, would be different, and the performance aspects would be different. And therefore, the maintenance activities that need to go alongside them are different. But this then allows you to consistently make sure that if it's outsourced, that the activities are consistent, and if it's in-house, the activities are consistent as well. For performance benchmarking, you have to know exactly what type of asset it is so that you can do a meaningful comparison. Otherwise, you're not going to really get any benefit out of that or any important insights. Accessing data, I'll come back to that in the second part of the slides. And the last bit there is risk and compliance. You have to know exactly what you have to make sure what sort of compliance requirements need to be met so that you can hit that 100% target in that sort of area. So I hope that gives you a bit of an example or an overview of the classification portion, which is that first part of the VBIS standard and how it can be applied and how it's been developed. And now I wanted to go into a bit of an explanation of that second part of the VBIS standard, which is that search syntax. So to give you some context there, what we normally find is information related to specific assets normally sits in multiple places. And this diagram hopefully gives you a few examples of that. And hopefully this is something you relate to as well. So because information comes in different formats and different structures and different, and different models and the like, they tend to be function specific. So as a result, they sit in function specific applications like your CMMS. There might be 3D models. You've got your building management systems, finance systems, document management systems, and the like. But to do proper planning activities and performance benchmarking, you have to really get a full whole of life view of the asset. And that's really by tying together all these useful components of information to have that full view of what the asset is doing, how it was constructed, and how it needs to be maintained and refurbished and so forth.
Just a quick one there, Hashan.
Yeah.
If the audience, because I'm acutely aware there's a lot of engineers in the audience, if there's some acronyms that you're not aware of or you're not au fait with, just post it up on the Q&A section, and then we'll come back and answer them later.
Good point, James. Thank you for that. So CMMS is maintenance management and AMS is asset management as far as this screen's concerned. But yeah, thanks for raising that, James. So with that sort of disparateness in mind, again, VBIS is all about let's keep things simple and let's see what is already out there that we can repurpose so that there's that consistency and robustness. So where we landed on is using URL language. So you can see a bit of example there on the top. But what if you convert that into how a human readable definition, what that's basically saying is, show me all drawings related to this chiller installed in this project. So you can see there's a number of parameters that's colored in different colors there that pass that information from one application to the other. So in this example, you happen to be in a 3D model or an asset management system. In that application, there'd be a button that the user can click, which then triggers this information request into the document management system. Now, the destination system's defined by that domain at the start. You can see it's application.name.com in this example. And it's saying, okay, here's the tag for this chiller. I'm looking for documents of drawing type, and I'm looking for chillers that got installed in this project name. So what this is not hard-coded links. It's a search request. So what we're trying to avoid here is custom APIs, which tend to be expensive to put in, and it becomes a bit of a black box in its operation. So rather, we want to give the transparency back to the operators and the asset owners so that this sort of linkage can be configured as opposed to done through APIs. And what we also want to avoid is hard-coded links, because as you know, if you're hard-coding to specific bits of information, as soon as the revision is updated for a document, for example, the link breaks, or you have to go and update the hard-coded links all over again. So with this sort of approach, it keeps things simple, but it also means that the latest and the most relevant information is always searched and displayed to the user. And in the video demo at the end, I'll show you how that kind of pans out as a real-world example between different applications. Now, the two parts then roll into what we call the VBIS-enabled application ecosystem. So in this sort of ecosystem, VBIS tied in with commercial applications give you this result. So in this example, all the information related to all the assets become meta tagged with the VBIS tag, and the user is able to search and locate the information and then get it displayed using that search syntax mechanism. Now, the other aspect to keep in mind is it's not about connecting every single application together. It's important to consider what applications should be connected and what sort of information is beneficial. So in this example, the asset system is the central point, and the user is able to link to documents, link to real-time performance through an analytics system, for example. And this is where the BIM for FM concept comes into a bit more of a practical approach to doing that, in that now that the assets within the BIM model have the VBIS tag, and the asset record in the asset management system has the VBIS tag, the search syntax is able to take the user simply by clicking on a button in the asset management system to that information in the BIM model. So it takes away the hassle of trying to figure out how to get to that asset and how to access the information in potentially a large BIM model. Now, the other aspect with regards to procurement, we're talking with a number of suppliers like the Reese Group to get their VBIS, get their product VBIS tagged so that it becomes easier to pass the VBIS tag to the supplier and get a whole range of manufacturers that make that same product and pricing back so that the quotation process can be made a bit simpler. So last bit I just want to cover is, I guess, our journey to date. Been featured in a couple of government frameworks and guidelines. So like we mentioned at the start, we've released a number of disciplines to date already. The other aspect we're doing is we're talking to different software vendors to become VBIS enabled. So we've spoken to a number of them already. And in becoming enabled, they then adopt the VBIS classification structure by being able to host the VBIS tag. And they also do some configuration to understand that search syntax request, whether it's coming in or being able to generate it going out, so that that search request can be done. So what this means for them is they essentially can be a Lego block in the operator's Lego model. So it's allowing that seamless clicking together, because we're all now tagging all the information using the same VBIS tag and talking the same language through that search syntax. And the other thing we've done is deploy a number of different ecosystems to date as well. So this has been varied, where some of them, it's actually all existing applications where we've connected up the data together by tagging and then employing the VBIS search syntax. Or in a number of cases, they said, oh, look, we don't actually have a document management system, and we've had issues with documents, so they tend to be all over the place and we can never find the right version when we need to. In that case, we put in document management system and done the tagging and the linkage together using the VBIS standard. So I hope that gives a bit of overview of VBIS and generates some thinking there. So what I want to do now is just play a bit of a video, and what I'll do is I'll pause through it just to give a bit of explanation of what's going on, because it does go through a bit quickly. And so I'll just play that now. So this is an example of a 3 application ecosystem. So in this case, there is a 3D model, a maintenance management system, and a document management system. And they're all typically disparate applications. Now, in this case, they're all linked together using VBIS. So as this is playing out now, what I'll also draw your attention to is on the top right, it'll show you which application the current screen is in, just because it will switch between the different applications just to show the workflow. So the first thing we're in now is the maintenance system. And now what we're going to do is do a wildcard search for ME-PU. What that will do is then, if you recall, ME-PU is mechanical pumps. That's going to give the user a quick ability to do a search for all the mechanical pumps in this building. So I'll let that search go through, and you can see the search has updated, and it's showing all the different mechanical pumps in this case, irrespective of the different use. So it can be condenser water pumps, heating hot water pumps, chilled water pumps, whatever use it is, it doesn't matter. It happens to be the same type of pump in this example. Now that I'm here, there's a specific pump there towards the middle there, where you can see the hand symbol. And what I'm going to do now is to click on the search request for all the documents related to that specific pump. So clicking on the green icon there, then sends a search request into the document management system. So what's that done is pass certain parameters like the equipment ID, the VBIS tag, etc., into the document management system. That's now being able to do a search for the user for all the documents related to that specific asset and give them a list of documents. And the user is now able to just go through and do whatever it is that they were planning to do with those documents, download it, look at it, get the information from it. And coming back into the maintenance management system, now what I want to do is try and figure out where this asset actually is in the physical space. Kind of timely, that sort of information these days, especially with it becoming a bit difficult to actually get into buildings to do that sort of assessment. So being able to look at where the equipment is remotely through a 3D model has been quite beneficial to a lot of people. But the thing is to make sure you're looking at the right asset, and this sort of linkage allows you to do that. So to do that, come back here, and I'm going to click on the View 3D Model link, which then drives another search request, this time into the 3D model space. And you can see it's brought up that same pump. The user is now able to just do a look around, do some measurements virtually, figure out if you're trying to replace the pump, if you need to get any scaffolding, any special access measures and the like, get it all done remotely by using obviously this format of information. But now that I'm here, VBIS works both ways. So what I want to do now is look up the asset record, because I want to see what is the current condition rating of the asset, how much have I been spending on the asset in terms of breakdowns and the like, and that information sits back in the asset management system or the maintenance management system. So what we've done here is built the links back into the maintenance management system. So in this case, I'm going to click on the asset record link, which then triggers a search back into the maintenance management system to show you all the details around installation, condition rating, cost of reactive issues and planned costs and things like that. Or I want to go back to the 3D model, and in this one, because we've tagged all the assets with the VBIS tag, you can actually quickly look up what are all my other equipment in here that are of a similar asset type. This is now important if you discover there's some sort of issue with this type of pump. You want to quickly find out, what is my risk profile across my whole portfolio? Because if you have a number of this same type of equipment, you might want to plan for a bigger replacement or a bigger fix. One example was, again, the cladding issue that came up, where a lot of people actually had to go and do physical inspections of buildings. And one of the outcomes of the confidence report that came out of the back of that was a whole of government asset register. And if you had that sort of classification built in, you could have basically clicked on a couple of links to then figure out what the risk profile was without having to spend all that labor trying to do that physical audit. So I'll just demo that now. I've just clicked on similar assets. That's done the same thing as how I did at the very start, where I did a search for ME-PU. So in this case, it's done it for you through that link, which has generated this result. And the last thing I want to show you is back into the 3D model. And this time I'm looking for technical specifications. So I clicked on that link, which has done a search for the specifications for that pump. And again, it takes me to the document management system to then have a look at the documents and display a result. And the last linkage back now is from the document system, where I'm looking at documents, but I want to see what asset this document actually refers to. So what we've done here is also tag the documents with the link to take you back to the digital space. And it's this sort of, so what I wanted to show you there is the interoperability of the different applications, because each application has very different information related to that specific asset. And what's useful here is to be able to, in a couple of clicks, bring up that information in those different formats using this VBIS open standard, so that you can, depending on the function that you're after, whether it's looking for documents, trying to figure out where the asset is, or do some measurements and the like, or figure out the asset's performance history, information in different applications. And what we're trying to do here is link it all together in a ecosystem arrangement so that the user can quickly get to that information. So that was the quick demo. Hopefully that gives you a bit of idea of how the standard can support that ecosystem in practice with that example there. So thank you very much. And James, I think we might have some time for questions if there are any at this point.
Yeah, thanks, Hashan. And I'll welcome people to post questions. We have 3 questions at the moment. I did fail to mention that there's a Q&A section at the end. So I welcome all questions to be posted now if you feel free. There's a question from Jeffrey. It'd be wrong to not have a question from Jeffrey. And of course, someone rings me at the same time.
Might be another question, James.
Maybe. But yeah, is VBIS aligned with Project Haystack schema?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Timely, because we've been speaking to the BRIC schema guys, if you know about them, over the last couple of weeks. So BRIC builds on Haystack, if you're not aware, and provides a bit of a hierarchy to Haystack. So Haystack's all about being consistent with the inputs and outputs. So pretty much the inputs and outputs into the control side of the whole structure, where it defines the temperature sensor, set point, control valves, and how to consistently name the points. And what BRIC does is it starts to bring in a bit of a hierarchy to give you a sense of how a VAV links back to the air handler and how that links to the temperature sensors and the control valves and the like. Now, they don't go into the detail of identifying the specific asset types. And this is where there's actually good alignment between what VBIS is doing versus what BRIC and Haystack are doing, because they go into a lot of detail about the IO, and VBIS goes into a lot of detail about the asset type. So you can start to see how the alignments come in, because if you're looking at specific analytics deployments, for example, having the specific rules defined using the Haystack convention for IO, it also becomes important to figure out what actual asset it gets deployed on, because not all rules, for example, in analytics will apply, for example, all air handlers, because there's various types of air handlers. There might be air handlers that have heat recovery units, or just supply only, or extract only, and the like. So what we're talking to BRIC at the moment is actually a bit of a collaboration effort, so that they can make use of the classification from VBIS, and then align that with the IO convention that's already in use to essentially give a bit of a superpowered solution back to the end user so that it's comprehensive in the classification of assets, which is important for life cycle and benchmarking. And what Brick and Haystack do is really important if you're looking at consistency of IO, as well as applying those bolt-on technologies like analytics and the like.
Now, I had another question. What does VBIS stand for? And I answered it remotely because I think I know the answer is, but I'll let you answer it just in case I got it wrong.
So VBIS stands for Virtual Buildings Information System.
And why the name VBIS?
Again, good question, because we started with looking at just the assets inside buildings, and we started in the services in the buildings because that's where our subject matter expertise lie. But that's now expanded into all assets that make up the built environment, because there's been interest from the transport sector, from the water sector, and all these other areas in between as well.
There's another fairly good question. Is VBIS freely available, and what formats is it in? Doc, PDF, or XLX? Yep,
so the classification tables are available on our website, so www.vbis.com.au. If you go on there, there's a link, I think, on the top right that says search and download. There's a very short sign-up process. Just put your name and email address in, I think, and that gives you access to all the tables that are available as they, so there's 21 already, and there'll be a few more by the end of this month, and they are in Excel format. And the other thing I'll bring to your attention is there's a search function in there. So if you want to do a quick search on the website itself for specific asset types to see how they get structured, then that allows you to do that as a bit of a quick access feature.
And Ben Mays asked the question, will the mapping of VBIS to Uniclass be available on that website?
Yeah, so that's actually an interesting question, because we've done the mapping, and we had a lot of conversations with NBS who support Uniclass on a fortnightly basis up until about early this year to validate a lot of that stuff as well. There's a few we haven't validated yet, so that's something we want to do. But what we've discovered with Uniclass is there can be a number of different definitions of the asset that the user may have decided to adopt. Just because there seems to be some vagueness in some aspects. So what we rather do is work with the user just to see what exact product code they have used for Uniclass, just so that we can advise on the exact VBIS tag or the level on the classification. Because of that, I suppose that there's a few options in Uniclass side that could have been picked by the user, and it comes down to how the user interpreted it. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah, that one I have experience with. So I understand where you're coming from there, Sean. There's quite a good question. Are there any alignments with IPWEA NAMs or BSpec in terms of hierarchy? That's quite a...
Yes, yeah. So we consider a number of different standards that are out there, not just from a consistency of the acronyms and the structure perspective, because we want to make this work alongside all of the other conventions or standards in use. The other aspects we've also done is in the long form description of the asset, we made sure we've aligned with how they get represented in the various standards. So the fire standard, for example, and forgive me, I might get the number wrong, but I believe it was 1850 that the guys were looking at. Just to make sure that the proper definitions of the fire assets, for example, are picked up in the long form description, because that becomes important in how the acronym in the VBIS tag gets defined, so that there's a consistency between what VBIS classified versus the different requirements of the standards.
I have another question in relationship to the Queensland government participation, and Victoria, obviously. Is there any flavour or inkle of New South Wales, South Australia, WA, the other states basically coming on board with the alignment?
Yeah, so we've only seen a whole of government approach in Victoria to begin with, and then also Queensland. So Queensland have done it a bit different. It's actually legislated there, so they have to have a BIM model for projects of a certain size and adopt the classification and all that sort of stuff. In New South Wales, Transport New South Wales have done a lot of work in this space just because of the sheer volume of infrastructure that they are looking to develop or construct now and in the near future. But we haven't yet come across a whole of government approach, but I was alluded to something that said it potentially that is kicking off in New South Wales. I believe there's something happening in ACT that it was just a timing thing where we haven't really looked into that just yet. And the same thing with WNSA and TADS. Not across it, but if anyone knows about it, we'd love to talk to them just to make sure that consistency is there at a national level. Because end of the day, this is all about resolving an issue. The issue is universal. It's not even just within Australia. The consistency of structuring information is going to be very important just because of the sheer volume of information and what usefulness you can get out of it. So it's a very important topic and a very timely topic. And yeah, certain states are coming on board. Certain states are likely thinking about it. And it might be a case of we're just across it for some of the other states. So yeah, more than willing to talk to them if we can be provided with some guidance, if anyone else knows about it as well.
I have another question in terms of what type of asset owners are using VBIS, and is there a limitation, I'm going to add to that question, on the type of users that might want to adopt VBIS?
So because of the frameworks and guidelines that have come out, there's obviously a high level of interest within the government space. And a lot of departments are looking at whole of department asset registers and classifications and different applications that they want to use and trying to be consistent across different types of infrastructure and all that sort of stuff. And so I mentioned a few deployments that we've already done, and a few of them have actually been in the commercial real estate space. So well-known buildings in the Melbourne CBD for private entities in the FM space that have adopted this because of, there are a lot of KPIs. The facility managers are always under the pump, trying to resolve 1,000 different things. So let's try and make the information easily accessible so that they can actually do the life cycle planning and maintenance activity and contract and management aspects as efficiently as possible. So there's interest basically across the board in that sort of sense, because like we were saying before, the applicability and the challenge remains the same, whether it's private or government.
I have one question that's from an anonymous attendee. Are there any implementations of VBIS across Australia thus far?
Yeah, so those are the ecosystems that I mentioned. So we've done 4 to date, and we're in active discussion with a few other government departments as well. So okay. The 4 have consisted of either connecting together existing applications that already carry the data and people have been using, but just disparately. So as a result, it's not always obvious, what documents might line up to the asset register, for example, and the like. In that case, we've, classified the data and helped link it all together. And in some cases, they haven't had a certain application to house certain types of data. In that case, we've got a number of VBIS-enabled partners that can either be adopted, or we're happy to talk to new software vendors that the user wants to use, because it's actually a relatively simple process for them to get VBIS enabled. Because end of the day, VBIS is not software, and VBIS is software agnostic. So we don't really care what software the person uses, because that's down to their different organizational KPIs, what sort of software they ended up using. We just want to make sure there's consistency in how the data is classified within those applications, and then help link it all together to then get that full whole of life view and then benefit from that.
Now, Jeffrey's asked another question, and I might ask him to add to this. What is going to happen with existing assets for large real estate users? Jeffrey, you might want to add a bit more clarity around that question, so Hashan can answer it a bit more succinctly.
So existing assets in real estate, did you say, James?
Yeah. It's what is going to happen with existing assets for large real estate users.
Hi. great presentation, by the way. Thanks so much, Hashem. It's really, really good. My
Thank you,
question,
Jeff.
you've got a fantastic tagging system here. And, you know, as I presume the hope is that this becomes the kind of industry standard, so we don't get a, you know, a kind of a Betamax versus VHS type tagging system in Victoria.
Yeah.
I suppose I'm thinking about, you think about the number of buildings that are owned by large real estate companies, by universities, by prisons, by, you know, et cetera, et cetera. In order to kind of maximize the advantages that you've got at the moment, are you looking to, you know, is there a thought that the asset owners would tag those assets and put them into the same format, or is that not realistic?
So if I understood the question properly, Jeff, are you asking how it could be done in terms of deploying the standard?
Do you think that is something that large asset owners are going to do, and how would they set about it?
Oh, okay, yeah. So there's a few different ways to, I guess, approach this, right? So, and it depends on the availability of time and the resource levels and that sort of aspects as well, probably from an organizational perspective. But we made the VBIS tags available for free download, so people can, you know, use them and implement them as they see fit if they want to. Now, the other aspect we're also doing is offering services to support that. So we feel we've developed it, so we're best placed to kind of understand the current structure of the data and the asset register that the large asset users are using. And we can help with either, you know, a training activity or actually supporting the actual physical deployment of the tags on there. And then it becomes an aspect of talking to the software vendor as well, because it's a case of either repurposing an existing field in the asset record or the record of the information in the applicable systems, or getting the software vendor to actually add a new field, which, you know, like I said, most of the people we've spoken to date, they've been saying that's not a big deal. And then putting that in basically. So if you put the VBIS tag in across the asset record, that gives you that classification straight away, because the tag itself provides you that 4-level structure. And the search syntax and the data linking aspect, that becomes a bit of a mapping exercise into what the VBIS search syntax sends through as information, because we've got that parameter titles being defined in the VBIS specification, and what the individual application has called them. Because what we find is those sort of parameters are already catered for in most cases in the application, but there's no consistency in what they're calling them. So like asset ID, I'll pick on that. You know, one might call it asset ID, the other one might call it equipment ID, for example. So it becomes a bit of a mapping exercise at the software level. But again, software vendors say that's easy done, because it's a mapping table exercise to do that, to then help implement that in. And if it's a large volume of assets, it doesn't really matter in a lot of cases, because if I pick the AG Coombs example, where we have deployed the VBIS tagging across the full asset database. So Coombs has about 600,000 or 550,000 assets nationally in their database. And that actually boiled down to about, I think, I can't remember the exact number, but like 900 and something different types of assets. So it becomes a bit of a methodical process to go. Let's not look at the big number, because there's going to be a lot of assets that are actually repeatable. And then there's other factors like considering, you know, maybe it's just the critical assets that you want to begin with and prioritize that to get the best value of this, and then propagate into other assets. So that's a bit of a, I suppose, roadmap type process that we're more than happy to talk with the asset owner to help them define what the best bang for buck approach is, Jeff. I hope that answers the question.
Great job.
I have another question here, and thanks for all these questions, people. And hopefully we've closed them out, or Hashan's done a good job of closing them out. There's one last question here on the 4-level hierarchy. So do all VBIS asset classes are they all based on the 4-level of hierarchy, or are there more, or can there be less levels of hierarchy? So
yeah, so
5 or 6
it's
levels if you want to go really deep.
So at this stage, we've made it maximum of 4, but there can be less than 4, because some asset types just, it doesn't need that level of detail to go down to that level of detail needed for life cycle maintenance and benchmarking perspectives, activities. So it's a maximum of 4 at this stage. And it's funny enough, actually, we talked to a lot of asset owners that have come up with their own bespoke solutions, and all the time it tends to be like a 3-level or 4-level system as well. But the challenge there is because it's bespoke, it doesn't lend itself to that, overall benchmarking capabilities and things like that, and linking to other asset data sets and things like that. So what we found with all the 21 disciplines we've done to date, the 4 levels has been more than sufficient. But like I said, there are some asset types that might not go down to the full 4 levels.
And this is a question from myself, Hashan. If you're going into an existing database of assets that are uni format or omni-class, or some cases in FM you get both. One site's one, another site's another.
And a bit of custom in the middle as well.
Yeah, has VBIS been used to cross-map or align the asset types between different sites that are similar in nature, but just by virtue of their age have been mapped to omni-class or uni format? Have you come across clientele, or has Coombs Group done that for themselves? Just a question from myself.
Yes, and that's exactly the point, right? So we are very mindful that they may have already adopted uniclass or omniclass, or they may have gone down a custom route. And in one case, there was, they've adopted uniclass only to come across that challenge I was talking about there, where it doesn't go down to the level of detail in some asset types. And they've introduced custom attributes. So it's become this hybrid uniclass then again. So that's exactly the challenge we're trying to avoid, where introduce a common open classification system that goes down to the level of detail, that's in terms of granularity and all that, which is still mapped to the main types. We obviously can't map to bespoke stuff that people have done, but it's to then live alongside the most common ones. If there's bespoke ones, maybe it's down to a level of detail that the mapping exercise becomes easy enough. But VBIS can sit alongside that, because there might be existing software queries and things like that that still depend on their bespoke way of doing things. That doesn't matter. So, and then you can transition later as you see fit as well. So it's been designed to be very flexible, whether you've already gone down a half uniclass or full uniclass or omniclass and uniclass or bespoke or whatever it is. End of the day, it's coming down to a consistent way of doing things, down to that right level to avoid all those different iterations. And the hope is at some point in the longer term, everyone's talking the same language and calling an apple and orange are orange. So you can do, national level benchmarking and stuff like that. And wouldn't that be great if you can do that at some point?
There's hoping. I notice it's 7:07 p.m. So we've come to a lot of Q&A, and we've had a lot of Q&A, and I think it's a good time to wrap it up. So I'd just like to thank you, Hashan, for providing your time tonight, to all the panel members who have attended to help set this up. And I welcome those who have attended tonight and in participation to look out for the next webinar session from CIBSE. Thanks to all who have attended. Once again, Hashan, thanks for attending and presenting on VBIS. I'll direct you to the thank you underneath there is Hashan's email address at vbis.com.au, hashan@vbis.com.au. And if there's anything you need, reach out to him, I'm guessing. He'll be more than happy to answer.